Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Helix Education's webinar series on COVID-19, the roadmap to fall 2020. Today, the topic is the partnership between the National Institute of Online Learning and Helix Education as it relates to quality online teaching and learning. Thanks everybody who's joining us today. My name is Sparky Mortimer. I am the Associate Director of Creative Strategy at Helix, and I'll be hosting today. If you've been with us before, this is our 10th webinar in this series. It's incredible. If you've been with us for one or more of our previous webinars, you know the routine. For those of you who it's your first time, welcome. Just a couple quick housekeeping items for you. We are recording today's proceedings, and a video will be posted on Helix Education's YouTube channel, as well as an email sent out to attendees so you can watch and share on demand. We're also using a service called Otter AI for a live stream transcription. You can find the link to that in the chat. And so if you'd like to take advantage of that, use that link in the chat. We will be taking questions today. We've already gotten some questions ahead of time, so thanks to everybody who's submitted. We'll also take questions throughout the presentation today. And so there's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You can click that and type in your question at any time, and we will get to it as we proceed. So like I said, this is our 10th one. And we have a very special guest for it being our 10th webinar, and that is Chris Edwards. He's Senior Vice President of Partnerships at MindEdge Learning and Managing Director of the National Institute of Online Learning. 2 decades in the higher ed space, that intersection between technology and education. Prior to MindEdge, he's had partnership and SME positions at lots of different companies, including Helix Education, which is where I first got to know Chris, and so we're glad that he's back today to join us. In addition to his professional experience, Chris has a lot of personal experience in terms of what it's like to be a first-generation student, what it's like to be a non-traditional online student, as you can see there based on the degrees that he earned from Liberty University and the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. So, Chris, thank you very much for joining us today. And along with Chris, we've got our most frequent presenter in our 10 webinars that we've done so far, Dr. Cherron Hoppes, Vice President and Chief Academic Officer at Helix Education, bringing 3 decades of higher ed experience to her role at Helix. So between Chris and Cherron, we've got a half-century of higher ed experience in today's presentation. So that's nothing to downplay right there. Cherron, again, within those 30 years, lots of different roles in terms of serving non-traditional students, accreditation peer reviewer, dean of undergraduate programs, and so lots of varied experience that Cherron brings to bear. And so Cherron, as always, good to have you here with us today. And again, Chris, we welcome you. Cherron, I'm going to turn the time over to you to start our conversation about this partnership between Helix and the National Institute of Online Learning and what it can mean for our college and university colleagues across the country. So Cherron, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sparky. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you back to our webinar series. I'm thrilled to see some repeat attendees with us. That's nice that you're finding some value in this. And as a matter of fact, I want to share some good news with you at the end of the webinar about your feedback as participants and what that means for the future of this series. But for today, I want to just share with you what our goals are. You know, we always try to lay out a plan as we go into these webinars, and we'll do a check-in at the end. But we want to introduce or reintroduce, as the case may be, and Chris will fill us in on the details of that, MindEdge's National Institute of Online Learning, and talk about why it's an important organization to have in this time, and why are we putting energy into kind of reinvigorating it and bringing it back to the higher education conversation. And then we also want to talk about an online learning certificate that is available through the New Future with Helix and NIOL in a partnership, and hopefully bring some value to you in participation and as you think about what's coming for the fall. And that's really what got us here, right? This idea of what our world of higher ed is going to look like. So we'll talk a little bit about those circumstances that have brought us here. Chris is going to share some information about MindEdge and NIOL with us, and then we're going to have a conversation. And for any of you who know me, you know that I am Chris Edwards' #1 fan. So anytime I get to have a conversation about higher ed with him, it's a happy day. So it's nice that you all are going to join us for this, and I hope you will take advantage of the Q&A section and send us some questions, add some comments, be a part of our conversation. We really appreciate that. We'll wrap up by talking about the 4 pillars of quality online higher education. And then finally, how Helix can help, what our commitment is to the higher ed community right now during these unprecedented times, and how we hope that we can offer support to campuses far and wide as they're struggling with the right answers for things. Now we're gonna load here, hold on. This is the joy of working online from home. We'll just skip that last slide then. So let's jump in and talk about some, or not. So, you know, as we all know, the world has completely changed from where we were in February and early March to where we are today and what we're contemplating as we're moving forward. And what we've seen is this big shift in how education is delivered, not just in higher education, but K through 12 as well. And our friend Phil at EdTech put together this great graphic to kind of express the chaos that we're facing, right? So phase one was kind of the wake-up call, some institutions giving as little as 48 hours notice to move their in-person classes to a remote emergency teaching environment, and then realizing we were gonna be here for a while as we make the decisions into what's gonna happen into fall. And those changes are happening day by day. Even as early as this week, both Harvard has announced to be fully online in the fall. The University of Southern California has said that it will go to a primarily online environment with only selective courses around lab sciences and performance arts having some opportunities to be on campus. And I think we're going to see that kind of fluidity as we move closer and closer to August, because that moves us into what's next, right? The time for investment around the right technology, the right infrastructure, understanding how we provide services. All of that, those are questions that have to be answered by institutions, and sooner rather than later. So we're often asked, you know, in this conversation of remote emergency teaching to online learning and a quality online learning environment, what if all this gets better? Well, that was a great question when we started doing these back in May. And I think the reality of it is that some version of this, our world today, needing to use technology to deliver educational experiences is going to be an ongoing thing. So whether it's this extension of what we're doing as a result of COVID-19, or it's really about longer term crisis contingency planning, using educational technology, using best practices in online learning are going to really be the only way our institutions of the future are able to respond to any kind of crisis. And I think that what we can agree on are that for those faculty who were not deeply experienced in using a learning management system or other technology tools, they really struggled. And the experience for the students was one that was incredibly challenging. Just today, some research came out from Every Learner Everywhere talking about those expectations, and the best class environment, not surprisingly, were the courses that used the majority of those best practices around engagement, around the kinds of technology, around blending experiences synchronously and asynchronously, and around the way faculty connected with their students. So we're going to have to think about something different than what happened in many ways in the spring for us to really have a positive educational model. So Chris, tell us about NIOL and MindEdge.
Awesome, Cherron. Well, first of all, I have to thank Sparky for a fantastic introduction. I don't know that I've ever been introduced so nicely. So thank you, Sparky, and thank you to Helix, and thank you to Cherron for having me. So NIOL was formed in 2012, and it was a product of MindEdge. And our goal then, as it is now, is to really look at online learning with a critical eye. And so, Cherron, as you mentioned, we're rebooting NIOL as a brand and as a thing. Right, as something we're really going to dedicate and focus on. And those goals and objectives are really aimed at continuing continuous improvement in the online learning space, right? I think research and practice, alliances across folks who are doing things well are very, very important to, you know, what we need to have happen as it relates to online learning in the shadow of COVID-19, and quite frankly, for the advancement of learners everywhere. And so at NIOL, our goal is continuous improvement and figuring out ways to amplify a lot of the great work that people are doing now and contribute in our own little way by acting as kind of a collection point and translator for some of what's happening in online education. Now, you probably want to know why NIOL and why MindEdge. So if you go to the next slide, just quickly about MindEdge, we've been around since '98. We were founded by Harvard and MIT educators, originally making digital textbooks in the earliest days of when things went digital. So Cherron, you and I have been around a long time, right? We know that Sloan C and some of those early organizations popped up at right about that same time, right here in Massachusetts where we're based. And so we've kind of been around this space for a long time as a group, and we focus on a couple of different baskets or doors to a house, if you will, for credit content, professional development content, continuing education content, and then custom solutions, working primarily for those who do online and focus on adult learners. So if you go on to the next, we've really adapted our focus over the years, right? In the earliest days, it was really about how do you get stuff to online and how do you work on that appropriately. In the middle, for a lot of institutions, especially those that are big online, some of the partners that we work with, it was how do you integrate those items into the best learning experience. And I think the way we think about it today, whether it's at Helix or NIOL, we're thinking about how does this express out into the future. So we're thinking about stuff like stackable credentials. How does professional development content and continuing education content lead into degree pathways? We're thinking about the best way to do things in the developmental areas, developmental math, developmental writing, and how does technology work on that? How do you align skills? And there's been a lot of conversation in the news about skills in the last week and a half to core courses in the classroom, when those things have kind of been diametrically opposed, like some faculty and their learning management system over the past couple of years, or many years, right? How do you enhance OER? What happens there? And then what do we do about bridging all those gaps? So a lot of great things that we're interested in at MindEdge, and I think a lot of those interests also carry over to NIOL, because I have to say, in talking to folks about what I do and what I've done over my career and the very winding path I've spent in online education over 20 years, I often need a translator. I use words and phrases and industry stuff, and nobody has any idea what it means, right? And that's a big problem, because now everybody knows what online learning is and what they think it means, and that's a huge challenge for everybody involved. So, that translation of these things into real language is super important. So if you go on to the next, one of the things that came out of NIOL's early years that have been with us for a long time is our certificate in online learning, influenced by the early work we did in kind of understanding the landscape as it came up in NIOL's earliest days and evolving that to practice over time. So the certificate itself is 5 component courses: an introduction, narrative learning, online learning accessibility, teaching online, and the technology of online learning. And it's really important to note that, as you saw before at MindEdge, our perspective really spans all kinds of topics and learners. So it's not specifically focused on academic implementations and outcomes. It really talks about online learning broadly as it applies to any learner that wants to really dig in and have a great experience. And I should note, our stuff is designed to be asynchronous, right? So you should be able to come in, find your way through, and have a fantastic learning experience as asynchronous does. But we're on a platform where you can easily blend it using LTI into the LMS. And here I go using those friendly acronyms in an audience that I think and know understands them. But the ways that you can deploy content continue to kind of live in that area as well. So having those experiences, being able to bring those to the forefront are really important. And we're excited that you guys offer this as a part of your new future and as a part of the partnership that we have together, because I think it really complements a lot of what we're about, but also a lot of the great things that Helix and the team and you, Cherron, have done over the years to really promote the broad environment that is the online learning space and what it means to be deeply involved, not only in the teaching and learning, but everything else that goes around it that frankly has moved from being a kind of sort of maybe thing we do if we're trying to be awesome and, rock on at OLC and go to Quality Matters and just be great, to you cannot skip these pieces anymore. It's that important on a number of levels. So I think I have one more slide. I'm very excited to announce and share about our partnership with the Helix team. Cherron, as you know, we go way back. I'm a Helix alum. And, you know, what y'all do in the marketplace and what NIOL's about in its reboot are really kind of together in a lot of ways. There's a lot of great synergies to what we talk about, especially in the areas where Helix thrives, which is thinking about all those other things outside the classroom that have to be in place in order to really drive and leverage success. So obviously the team there is working to offer the material that we have today. We've been working on a lot of great stuff. We're going to partner together over the next few months, though, to not only think about new things, but refresh some of the current courses that we have. There's definitely some additional topics. I think instructional design and institutional operations for online have evolved rapidly in the last 5 years. So it's really important to be on top of that. Maintaining a good historical foundation, mind you, because as I know from my time in technology, not everybody wants to be on the very cutting edge of things, and higher ed is very much in that way. And nobody really wants to change anything. But when we think about kind of having that solid base and then talking about stuff that's in the marketplace now, we want to make sure that the courses are refreshed, reflect not only what needs to happen today, but some of the outcomes from COVID. So we're working with the Helix team on that. Not only that, but an advanced certificate as well, and advanced topics. Digging into the regular thought leadership that y'all have, which has been fantastic. And I'm excited that one of the things we have at NIOL is a learning council, which is made up of folks from around the industry who advise and influence on the kinds of things we should be highlighting, amplifying, researching, and doing. And I'm excited to have you joining our Reconstructed Learning Council, which will debut in a couple short weeks. So very excited for all these things about the partnership that we have with you all, and some of the great things that we can do together to amplify best practices in online learning.
Well, and I'm thrilled, Chris, to be a part of the Learning Council. I think these conversations are so important, and just appropriate and timely in ways that maybe it wouldn't have been back in the early days when you and I first started doing this work in online. And so I'm thrilled to be a part of this and see how NIOL can really influence the conversation and the research going forward.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and just kind of open it up for us to chat a little bit about some of this fun stuff. And, you know, Chris, one of the things that I love about our conversations is your background, right? You've been in so many different environments that have supported learners, supported online learners through technology and that beautiful integration of learning science and the technologies that are available. As you see it from your role now with that experience, what do you think are some of the things that institutions are going to have to absolutely commit to now to prepare for what we can assume is going to be a very different future for higher ed?
Yeah, I think at a high level, and we could spend, I think, a deep series talking about this, but one of the things is that we kind of have to change the way we change stuff, right? So, you know, when we think about the early days, we'll go back to LMS days. When you think about implementing a new learning management system, if you dig into the Internet Archives and you look at campuses, there were 3-year rollout plans for moving from one learning management system to another. That's just way too long.
Yeah.
Plain and simple, full stop, right? So that's kind of been one of the things we've done over the last 10 to 15 years, I think broadly as an industry, when we moved from Angel and WebCT days into what we have in modern systems, and we tried to integrate all those pieces and brought a lot of technology together. A lot of it was really slow to roll out. It was very optional, and it didn't necessarily all work together, right? Including content, which was a bad thing. So changing on that front absolutely positively has to be a thing that I think we're all conscious of, that times are changing, things are really changing this time, and it's not going to be okay. Like that one professor said when he sang the song about COVID and teaching online, that he'd skipped so many of the great sessions that his campus teaching and learning center had done for him. Everybody's got an LMS, everybody's got a teaching and learning center, and everybody's got awesome, kind-hearted, intelligent individuals on their campus who are there to try to make things better. And so those folks need to be in the middle of the change. Yeah. But practically speaking, I think the second thing, and a bigger thing, is that we do have to think about the user's experience. And I'm not talking about like a technical term in a way, but think about the user experience broadly. Think about the way that the learner is going through the gauntlet that you've set up for them. And that's exactly what it is. It's a gauntlet. It's like going on American Gladiators. You don't know which gladiator's coming out. You don't know which little thing they're going to hit you with. You don't know if you're going to slip and fall or not. It's a gauntlet. And trying to build a better pathway through the gauntlet, or a guided pathway through the gauntlet, is really, really important. And that comes down to technology and integration. And it comes down to how that works for students, faculty, staff, and alumni. And that's a really important bit of it, in my point of view, is focusing on a learner's experience. And a lot of that is integration in a large majority of ways for that first step down the pathway, connecting the pieces you have today together.
Yeah. You know, and one of the things that we've talked about this a couple of times, but we saw kind of across the landscape was this idea of, you know, whether mercenary or generous, a number of the ed tech providers kind of opened up their wares and said, come use these during these unprecedented times. And so, you know, we'd see folks with this list of 15 new technologies. This is a great time. And it's like, no, it's not, because nobody knows what they're doing anyway. There's no tech support for it. There's no, right? Let's not make things more complex than they need to be. The idea of a template across a program, so students aren't having to relearn the purpose and value of a discussion forum versus the Dropbox from class to class to class, right? Those are decisions that are not about infringing on creativity or, heaven forbid, academic freedom, but really speak to what you're talking about. And that's creating a learner experience where they're focused on what we want them to be focused on, and that's the content of the subject. Rather than the navigation of whatever tool du jour you might have put in front of them.
That's it. Yeah. Well, if you think about how much we rely in certain segments on technology today, you know, you think about I think about the bank, right? How many times do you check your balance? How many tools are on your phone? Would it be okay for my bank not to tell me where my money is at any given point? Like, literally at no point in any day in any universe is it okay to log into this thing and not know where my money is, not know how much I have. But the way the learning management system has been used across the system, grades, feedback, all that stuff is by the wayside. And I think if you talk to folks who have really robust deployments, pick the learning management system, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with how the experience goes. I think some of that is because if I'm carrying 5 courses in a traditional environment where there's not a commitment to what you just said, templates, user experience, understanding the importance of the tools, all it takes is one faculty or one course in my solution that's just fallen down, that just posted their syllabus, to make the whole user experience fall apart for that particular student. That class unwittingly becomes, in a lot of ways, the barrier for that student to have a successful semester. And so getting over that, getting past that, and getting through that is an important part of what needs to change right now, in my very humble, very minimally informed opinion.
Yeah. It's so funny because as you were talking about the whole, if I don't know where my money is kind of experience, it's, that's the same kind of thing, exactly what you're talking about with the feedback. And I think one of the steps that gets missed in all of this is the idea of setting expectations for things, right? And so particularly if a number of campuses are talking about going to shorter terms into the fall, or to breaking into smaller sessions within the terms, so there's a little bit more flexibility. Well, if you're a faculty member that's used to teaching a 15 or an 18-week course, and it might be a writing course, and you might have students turn something in week 2 and not get back with them until week 4 or 5, that's a different context than having a 6-week course and taking 2 or 3 weeks to get feedback to students, right? This idea of being responsive to students just to support their learning, right? Giving them formative opportunities is much like, if I put my deposit in the bank, I want to know how long is it pending? When is it real money, right? The same thing with grading too. So there are definitely some things that we're going to have to completely shift our paradigm on to be more responsive to what's coming, whether we're ready for it or not.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely.
As we talk about this, one of the things that from almost day one got me in the gut was this idea of talking about what happened elementary school, high school, higher ed so quickly, and the conversation around online learning. And I just almost wanted to, stand up on a big tower and yell, this isn't online. Online's really better than this. So for those of us who have been such evangelists for the value and the purpose and the quality experience in online, what do we do today to counterbalance some of those perceptions? And I think even more so the perceptions of kids that went through this K through 12 experience, that their future in higher ed could very well be online, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. So it's really interesting on that front when you consider the whole spectrum of learners, right? When you think about certain states, I think Florida is one where students in K-12 are expected to take an online course before they graduate, right? The Florida Virtual School is one that has been around for a long time, among other aspects in that particular state. And so some states have a strong POV as to what online learning can and should be from a user experience perspective. I think, so something that happened yesterday, right? Harvard announced that they're going to go online for the term. And in my Twitter feed this morning, there was this pithy tweet, so Harvard's the University of Phoenix now. And a lot of interesting commentary with it, including a friend of mine who takes some classes at Harvard Extension. And I snapped at him a little bit, and he, was being kind of sassy about how much better Harvard was than, other things that he experienced. And I was like, buddy, you need to understand that the U of P brought some pretty fantastic practices and research into the Florida to meet adult learners. And I hate to tell you that every institution that's doing an awesome job has probably adapted a lot of those best practices that come straight down that tree, including the very institution that you're attending. So I think the biggest thing about where online is and needs to go, the brand online learning has been wrapped up for the last 5 to 7 years in technology that hasn't really proven a promise in a lot of respects, right? Especially the foray into very complicated adaptive learning practices, right? Big time challenges from that particular perspective and the way that online learning is perceived. It's almost perceived from the public as this black box of magic that's really supposed to deliver these awesome personalized outcomes, when in fact, it's probably just some branches from a really common tree that's been picked up and influenced by data, but also has kind of been developed heuristically in a way that we understand how things work.
Yeah.
And having that branch, it takes a lot longer to lay out the best practices of those branches than it does to market a black box and presume that all the answers are inside. And so I think that's one of the big things that those who've been involved online for the longest time have to very much be careful of. And one of the reasons why we brought NIOL back in a lot of ways is that there needs to be a translator for a lot of what we're doing in terms of good practice and a lot of what happens at great institutions. It's almost as if there's a bit of a maturity index around institutions and how they're set up to deal with these things. If you go to the ones who do really well online and the ones that maybe haven't made that a focus, but now really quickly need to be better at providing a wide range of services and instruction, it's really important to kind of shine a light and provide a translation for what is most important for learners to pay attention to. I think the third big thing, a large majority of learners don't experience online courses before they choose to study online, right?
Yes.
As an adult learner, one of the great things when I did my MBA at UMass, so I did it when I was working, right? So it was the only way I could do it. There was actually an executive education center no less than 5 miles from my house, but Cherron, we've traveled together many times. I've traveled for 10 plus years. I just don't have time in a day where I can go and take a class. Wish I could, can't. So eternally grateful for a quality program at UMass, something that was online, relatively asynchronous and focused on, being able to provide that access. And thankfully they were able to, you could take a class before you started. So you understood how the program was set up and the guidelines were really specific. At the time they partnered with the American Medical Association, there were a lot of doctors in the courses. Doctors don't get access to internet in the hospital when they're trying to do their coursework at night. So it had to be asynchronous because there just were restrictions. You couldn't do it another way. Having the chance to take that course and to understand the groundwork of the program to start helps tremendously for my experience as I moved all the way through, because I knew how it was built, what the demands on my time were going to be, and what quality was. I could see what the experience was going to be. And whether you're taking something that's blended or has a bunch of asynchronous, or are those synchronous sections at those institutions that are great, having that understanding of what the experience is and being able to pace yourself and learn what's happening there is as important as, hey, I'm taking a degree or I'm going online, because we know some of those things you trip up on are the barriers that keep you from finishing. And that's not what anybody wants at this stage of the game, given the investment required, time and energy and dollars in higher ed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that point, because we tend to keep that learning experience behind the curtain for learners. And, one of the things that we've started doing, working with our partners in recent years, is creating an online new student orientation and doing it in the learning management system in a way that resembles the way their classes are going to be set up and structured. So they're getting an understanding of the tools and the navigation at a time where their focus can be about, because it really is the institution, it's a reflection of it, right? So what a great way to set that up. And we've found some real success and good feedback around taking those steps. But I do like the idea, it's so interesting. You think about all of the huge production that you might see in a master class or in some of the MOOCs that are available out there. And that's not the reality of what online looks like at the vast majority of institutions. So why not create an experience that gives students that, at least a view into it and an understanding of it? You invite them to your campus, you let them sit in your classrooms when they visit. Why not do the same for online? So I think that's a very important point as well.
Well, when you think about how many of our elite institutions have different brands and different parts of the institution and offer different things online, I'm thinking of folks who are partnered with edX and Coursera and FutureLearn, and they do their own MOOCs, and they have an open courseware project, and then they have what is their traditional undergraduate online experience. None of those things are the same. None of those things are curated. Some of them are junk. Let's just be clear, right? Bad narrations over poor slides, and it's basically just information on a well-curated web page. And so I think that's another big challenge, for anybody who's on the call who's thinking about or is in an institution where you're teaching traditional undergraduates, right? Their parents have and the internet provides them with a much different POV and perspective as to what online learning is supposed to be. And this thing is, I'm watching a bunch of lectures and not a whole lot else is something it's really difficult to explain. I think a lot of adult students are fundamentally challenged with, and they've primarily been online, explaining what it is you're doing in your online class all day.
Yes.
Right? It's not the same experience. It's like, well, what am I doing? My family only knew that from Friday at 3 to the rest of the night, right? While they were taking a nap on Saturday and all day Sunday, I was off somewhere doing a thing. That's it.
Yeah.
If you ask anybody, they have no idea what I did. Just like they have no idea what I do now for work. So when you think about how that impacts perception, and it impacts expectations, and it impacts the bank. We've already talked about the bank. People are worried about where their dollars are going. It's really important that these good experiences come out to the front. And we as an industry are probably 3 layers deep in debating the merits of A, B, and C, and the latest research and best practices in analytics and doing all these other things. Whereas a lot of the conversation needs to come back up to the top level and be like, look, this is the established standard. This is what you should be looking for. This is why it's good. And if you want to dig into the research, here's the bucket of it. Right?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Well, and I think that conversation even extends to what we see and hear around the idea of tuition for online courses, right? That they are somehow less than, so they should be less expensive than, that they have less value as an outcome, or even institutional perceptions that somehow faculty shouldn't be compensated or their time accounted for in an online course in a way that even like the assumption is that in-person is going to be so much more taxing. And I can tell you, as someone who has taught in both modalities and blended over the years, that is not true. If I'm picking and choosing, I would much rather be in front of a classroom for 2 hours and 40 minutes one night a week and call it a day and answer a couple of emails, from the ease of my time and the pressure of my time, than to be fully engaged in an online environment. When I'm thinking about how I want to see my students progress and measure their learning and understand that learning against what I want for outcomes at the course and the programmatic level, I want to be online all the time, every day. I feel like there's more structure and more opportunity to really get that sense of of how learning is accomplished, and to have those measurements that allow me to know exactly what should be improvements in my teaching strategy or in my course development. But that's all part of that bigger conversation that I think folks don't want to have or aren't ready to hear at this point.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of legacy techno, I won't call it phobia, in the earliest days in the LMS game. And when you talk about analytics anywhere, it's a hot topic on any campus you walk into, right? For a lot of learners, it's the way that you can apply resources the best to ensure equitable outcomes. But a lot of folks look at it and go, it's surveillance. I don't want anybody looking at it. Right. And there was a great Twitter thread from Barry Dahl at Desire to Learn today in response to, I think, something that blew up in Canada about a TA who was like, look, the LMS can see these things. And he went point by point and said, yes, the LMS can see this. And so can your faculty member. They just see it in person in the classroom. Right. Like whether it's, were you there on time? I can see if you're there. Were you sleeping in class? I can see if you've been online. Like there were about 8 or 9 things that he walked through that were just spot on, right? And I think at that level and at that level of care for a learner, it's really important stuff. I think in the middle is where we've been stuck for the last couple of years, in my opinion, Cherron, where, there's the all online, everything that it brings, the mapping of outcomes, the analytics that can inform practice and continuous improvement. And then there's the majority of faculty, like you just said, it's a whole lot easier on my time and my expertise and all that I've sunk into it to come to class at my appointed time, to give a lecture, take a couple questions, sit in my office for office hours, make some connections with students if I'm awesome, and then go along my way. Much easier for the faculty. For those who have been working to blend or flip their on-campus environments,
yes,
that's hard work, right?
Yes.
Because you're not only trying to do new things in the classroom. So if you're like me and never want to give the same presentation twice, it's kind of in your nature. If you're not like that and you don't want to do that stuff, you're it's trouble, right? And if you think about, okay, so not only am I blending in class to provide this great experience, I've set expectations, it's going to be awesome. It's like running a Cub Scout meeting, right? You get 50 little Cub Scouts in there and you're supposed to keep them entertained for an hour, 12 weeks a year, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, I don't care what it is. At that quantity, there's an expectation it's going to be fun. And if you've ever led one of those things, the pressure of trying to make it fun for as long as you can make it, right? So I think that I'll call it PTSD from the blended experiments that we've had over the last 5 to 7 years have not helped the move to online. As you mentioned, faculty don't get recognized as much as they should in the process, tenure and promotion and things, for taking time to teach and be awesome in that way. It's a lot of work. Outcomes are probably a little bit the same, if not a little bit better. Individual learning outcomes might be great, but it's hard to quantify and measure. And so that's just something that, again, I think needs to be put in its proper context and given an appropriate place in this discussion that we're having about, what does online and its various components and means actually mean to a student institution.
So I want to check in, Sparky, if we had anybody submit anything through Q&A, any questions, any comments from our audience?
Nothing active on the Q&A yet, and so we'd encourage everybody to continue to weigh in on the conversation here and share any further questions that you have. We did have a question about just confirming that when we say NIOL, it's the National Institute of Online Learning, and so
that is correct. Thank you.
There, and so
anyway. Did I twang? Yes, the National Institute of Online Learning, NIOL. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure I twanged it at some point in there. Sorry about
it's
that.
the joy of acronyms. I mean, they begin to take a life of their own before it's all over. So, Chris, that's a nice segue. Thanks, Sparky. But speaking of NIOL and the work, kind of its roots from 2012, and now where it is, MindEdge leadership, your leadership, and thinking now's the right time. We want to be a part of this conversation. What, in your hopes and dreams bag, where do you see NIOL fitting into this in the larger picture?
That's a good question. So first, maybe a little bit of history. So last July, instead of being home, as folks, as one is these days, I did a toured a learning management conference. So I went to the Canvas conference, I went to the Blackboard conference, I went to the D2L conference. It's been a couple of years since I've been. And I really want to just kind of sit down with those who were really experienced across online education, as it were, and really kind of understand where things were in the space. And after that month, I came back and I thought two things. One is we've come a long, long way in online learning from even just my days at Canvas, my days as a student. You know, we've come a long, long way. And yet there's a long way to go for a lot of institutions in implementing things. And the thing that stuck with me, it was a blog post that was never written, just like a MOOC that I may never attend, that this coming year was going to be the year where we had to ban the simple posting of the syllabus on the LMS. Can't happen anymore. Can't do it, right? There's so much sophistication about how we're trying to serve learners online that you cannot be the faculty who just posts the LMS, says, forget this whole thing, and just walks away, because it has too much of an impact on the user experience. So that was where we started to think about, gosh, we work with some of the best institutions out there. We also endeavor to work with some institutions at MindEdge that may not be as advanced in their online practices and have experienced firsthand how difficult it is to really implement for a lot of faculty in a way that pushes stuff forward, right, and moves things along. And so that's where thinking about rebooting NIOL first came into play. But the second bit is, again, if you download every report that's out there like I do, and you sign up for all the webinars like I do, and you watch some of the conference things back like I sometimes do, there's a whole host of knowledge around online that just is not necessarily aggregated and amplified in the way that it should be, right? Yeah. And so NIOL, I think, is a fantastic venue to amplify a lot of that stuff. And then kind of the third bit is really where the partnership with Helix comes in. We know that there's so much more to doing this right online than just having a good online course experience. Yeah. And that's vital as well, right? It's really, really important that everybody starts to understand the 360 degrees of what it means to deliver learning in an online way in the context of academics, equity, opportunity, efficiency, convenience, cost. There's so much of it. So when I think about what we're trying to accomplish at NIOL, there's definitely opportunities, I think, to bring some of these perspectives to the forefront so that more folks can get their eyeballs on kind of the canon of what's happening around, frankly, some fantastic organizations, right? That people like OLC and Quality Matters and WCET and Every Learner Everywhere and all the consortiums, they're all top-notch and deliver 1,000 things. And we're definitely not trying to be that in our little world. But what we are trying to do is really amplify a lot of that, translate the conversation into a way that any learner can understand, and really advance the practice of serving any learner in the place that they are, whether it is in academics and in higher ed, or in some of the professional development areas as well. So that's where we really want to see NIOL go. We want to dedicate some resources toward it and really hopefully elevate some of that conversation, simplify it. And if I've won at the end of a certain period of time, my friends and family will finally understand what it is I do without having to translate it. I think that's the ultimate test. If you can explain it to a layperson, I think we're on the right path. So that's really the ultimate test and goal.
I love it, because I have a collection of friends and family that would like me to be able to do that too. So I'm on board. I'm on board.
Yeah, we're going to try on that.
So Joseph O'Brien sent us a chat question, and he said, Chris, could you explain more how blended learning experience has adversely impacted development of the adoption of online, if I understood it correctly? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And this is just really, again, you'd have to dig into some research here. This is anecdotal, but when we think about the effort so let me step back. So we'll go back into my days at Canvas. One of the great things about the Canvas learning platform, it was wicked easy to use, right? And so it's deployed everywhere. If you look at the stats, those who adopted Canvas used their LMS in leaps and bounds. It stopped being the syllabus repository and file repository that it was before, that thing that they just mandated, and it started to actually get used, right? So that was the first step. For a lot of people who were excited about its usability, the next step for them on campus was, I want to blend and flip my classroom, right? And this is specifically around on-campus courses, right?
Yeah.
Where they were thinking about flipped, right? And flipped and blended get flipped and blended in the conversation. I think that's another problem that we have is there's all this kind of, we talk about high flex and flipped and blended and all the rest of it. Like it's a bit of soup and it's hard to kind of get your hands around. So what I was referring to specifically there is that on-campus faculty who embraced the LMS saw the value in something that's usable and thought, boy, am I going to just really kick this up to max, but take the advantage to spend my time in person even better, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of centers for teaching and learning and a lot of groups focused on how to help their super users kick it up a notch and really bring in fantastic practices. And I just think from a broad perspective, one of the things that the broader adoptive faculty would take away from that is that, holy crap, that's a lot of work, right? And I don't know that I want to do that work, right? Just like you said, Cherron, I don't know if I want to do that work. And, if you look at the outcomes, there's not dramatic increases in outcomes data for those types of courses in certain cases that you'd want to see. That's kind of been the wrinkle on online, broadly speaking, right? Like there's different modalities, there's ways to deploy it, but is there a measurable increase in outcomes so that we can say that it's quote unquote better? There's not. It's just different, right? And it serves a different audience at a different time. So, the one thing we'd always say in terms of change for higher ed is it's really important to have the goodwill of those who need to do that change. And they have to see the value in it. And when it came, again, to campus implementations, the best implementations happened when there was a faculty who just was known for being anti the thing, hated it, but tried it, liked it, and wanted to do a little bit more. That was the real movement into, look, if Professor X or Dr. Y thought this was okay, and they actually did it, and they went to the trainings, etc., and they'll give a testimonial about it, I got nothing to complain about because I'm over here and Professor X is over here, right? So that's where, again, anecdotally, I don't think it's done anything for the folks on campus, especially in the conversations around high flex, right? High flex is great in that, you're thinking about giving the student agency over how and when they attend, right? And having the course set up to accommodate that. But boy, does it require a lot of work from everything that I've read and seen. It's as a high school teacher would say, that's 3 preps instead of 1.
Right.
I don't have time for 3 preps. So I think some of the mechanics of these processes have caused challenges. I feel like if you're starting from scratch, one of the things we've talked about at MindEdge and elsewhere is that you should be building for blended learning, right? When you're building your courses, build for blended. Everything should be integrated into your primary learning management system from the jump. You should be using all those tools and best practices so that if you have a disruption or if you need to pivot, you've already built that online space the way you need to. So I don't want to get that wrong. Like you should be building for blended. And if you do it from the top with the tools that you have, I honestly think it's an easy thing, relatively speaking, right? Especially if you got a little help and support. But what can be challenging is that point of view around, gosh, this is a lot of work. And, challenges with faculty pay and faculty support and faculty equity and, faculty appreciation for putting in that work, I think doesn't help everybody as they consider how much time they should be putting in to prep for an experience in the fall that's going to be bumpy at best. So I hope that answers the question-ish.
Sparky, did we have anything else come in the last few minutes?
No, I haven't seen anything. So I think we're good to go into the home stretch.
Well, Joseph, thank you so much for your question. Chris, I appreciate any time I get to spend with you. And for those of you in the audience, that we could probably continue this for a long, long time. But we want to respect your time and thank you so much for coming with us. So I'm going to see here if I can actually get our PowerPoint back up to wrap this up. I had some Wi-Fi issues along the way, so I told Sparky, I said, please have my back if something happens. So we're going to do a share screen again and jump back in because I want to be able to talk to you all about the 4 pillars of quality online education and what Helix wants to continue to offer to support. And now particularly excited to bring NIOL into that offering of what we can do for you. So when all of this happened back in the spring, a number of us at Helix sat down and really thought about, we've been doing this for a long, long time. We've been in the program management business and supporting higher education institutions from marketing to graduation and instructional design and everything in between for over 30 years. And so how can we bring that to bear? And we really thought about what are some of the top topics that institutions need to be prepared to think about as they move through the summer and into the fall. So we put together these 4 pillars. The first is institutional online readiness. This is that bigger picture of things that Chris was talking about. You know, have you made operational and policy decisions at an institutional level that facilitate your business of higher ed in a way that students don't have to come to campus? Today's topic around online teaching and learning was definitely part of the conversation. Next week, you'll hear more about some things in terms of online student experience and their engagement, how to keep them successfully participating in their programs and moving to graduation. And then finally, thinking about that all-important communications piece of this. How do we set expectations for both students and parents as we move through a time that none of us have ever been used to seeing? So those 4 pillars are what we put together, and then we wanted to figure out how we could help folks. We've been doing this in our partnerships for a long time. We are agents of change in these campuses as they really strive to accelerate growth in their adult and online programs. So we wanted to collect all of that knowledge and experience that we have and make it free and available to the community. So we, within each of the pillars, have put together a number of tools that are available to institutions of higher education. They can go to our helixeducation.com website to the new future section and pick and choose from each of these pillars. And there they'll see things like assessment rubrics, templates for communications, how-to guides for an online student orientation, benchmarks and KPIs as you think about what are the metrics you need to be looking at deeply to make sure that you're meeting expectations. And then probably the biggest piece are the professional development training opportunities. We've recorded each one of these webinars. We've been doing podcasts for a number of years around topics pertinent to higher education. And we've also provided some of the training that we do with our own staff around coaching and supporting students as well, all available to download at the website. So again, each of our pillars is represented. And we've been doing this, as Sparky mentioned at the top, for 10 weeks now, and had, had laid out these great graphics for our journey through this point in July. And we asked you all a couple weeks ago, what else do you want to hear? What else can we bring to you to help continue this conversation? So we're in it as long as you need us to be. And these are some of the topics that we have coming in future weeks. You may see some changes in titles as we're still kind of developing them based off of your feedback, but we want to make sure that we talk specifically about student retention and coaching strategies and communications. We know that institutions are struggling with the right way to position and market themselves right now, because you want to have the value of the institution, but so many institutions are tied to that persona of the in-person campus. So how do you extend that brand? Lots of questions about the CARES Act. So I'm going to do some work to build expertise there and welcome some folks to come and talk to us about, what are some of the best practices? What are the best ways to leverage that funding, both in terms of serving students directly, but then also in supporting your institution as you're making these transition. And then I'm going to invite my team to come on board, and we're going to talk about some specific ed tech tools, some things that we really feel are beneficial to engage students in their learning process and their journey, and we'll keep delivering them. So if you've got more ideas for webinars to come, please don't hesitate to be in touch with us. So our goals today, I hope we hit on them. Chris, thank you for being such a fabulous guest as we talked about NIOL, or about MindEdge and the certificate. We're definitely excited about looking at the advanced certificate with you in the coming months. So watch for some new topics there as well. Sparky, I'm going to let you take it from here and take us out to the end.
All right, that sounds great. Thanks, Cherron. And thanks again, Chris, for joining us today. Glad to have you with us. So just really quick, more information about the pillars of online education, as well as the courses that are available through this partnership between NIOL and Helix Education. You can find it right there at helixeducation.com/new-future. Home to lots of professional development resources, webinars, and podcasts, all the things that Cherron went through today. You can also email us at any time at newfutureinfo@helixeducation.com. If you've got future webinar topics for us to talk about, or just any other questions that we can help answer from you, that would be fantastic. So again, Cherron and Chris, thanks again for joining us today. We hope everybody out there has a great, safe day and week. Cherron and Chris, thanks again. Thanks everybody out there for joining us. Thanks for your questions. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.